I've always wanted to create a short film in Blender, but to make it a little bit more challenging and make sure I actually finish it, I challenged myself to make it in under 1 week. So in this video I'm gonna show you the full process of how I went from a default cube to a finished 1-minute short film from scratch in Blender. The idea for the short was to have a couple of rebel soldiers moving through a wasteland and then have them be ambushed by a killer robot. Making robots in 3D have both their benefits and downsides. You can get away with a lot by just kit bashing random wires and robotic parts, but to make it feel a little bit more defined, you need to venture into hard surface modeling. Because of the time restraint, I completely disregarded making clean geometry for the characters and focused entirely on getting the look that I wanted. So instead of sculpting it all from one cube, I decided to use a meta ball workflow. Basically, you have these different rounded shapes that sort of merge with each other, and you can set some of them to be negative to cut out shapes. This means that the workflow isn't destructive and you can easily move the shapes around until something clicks for you. So I made this one side of the robot and then mirrored it, and this is our base to add details to. I made some of these piston things and placed them all around the joints, and then to give it an armored look I made this metal plate with some cool geometry and placed it on the legs and arms. I gave it 2 different materials to add some texture variation and then worked on adding some wires and tubes. The easiest way to do this is by using curves, but just make sure to convert them to mesh before rigging. I used the same metaball workflow to create a futuristic bullpup rifle, and I wasn't at all happy with the final results, but I had to remember not to focus too much on the details and instead work on the project as a whole. So this had to do it for now. And look at that, we have a battle robot. At this point it was time to work on the human characters in the short film. I blocked out a basic human shape using the base rig as a reference for scale. To avoid having to do facial animation, which is a whole different level of complex, I decided to put gas masks on them. And then I basically just modeled a couple of different clothes using subdivided cubes and a combination of cloth simulation and sculpting. To get these nice looking seams and edges in the clothes, I just selected the entire edge loop in edit mode, beveled it and extruded it. Small details like this really go a long way in selling the effect of clothing in 3D. I used this concept art image from Metro Exodus as a color palette and I dropped the colors from there. To make it feel like these guys had been out in the wasteland for some time, I gave them this backpack to carry their stuff in. At this point the characters were looking pretty good, so I started working on the actual environment. I want to take a quick moment to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is the largest online community for creatives made by industry professionals in countless different areas. No matter if you're looking to improve your Blender skills, your cooking expertise, or pick up an entirely new habit like playing the piano, Skillshare's got you covered. With a new year coming up, what better time to invest in a new skill set that will make 2025 just a little bit more exciting for you. You've probably heard a lot about Skillshare from creators on this platform, and if you haven't already joined us there, now is a great time to do so. That is because Skillshare is giving away a free month of full access to the first 500 people that click the link in the description. And what I love about Skillshare is that it makes learning really fun and effortless by having these structured learning paths that you can go down, and it's really nice to have everything structured like this, especially if you're learning a new skill like Blender. It takes away all of the looking around for tutorials and being constantly sidetracked and stuff, and instead just takes you from point A to point B, giving you all of the information you need to make actual progress. So claim that free month now, and I'm sure you'll love it. Again, big thanks to Skillshare for bringing this video to you. I blocked out these skyscraper-ish buildings and gave them some damaged areas using the explode modifier and some sculpting to make the floors sag down like this. After adding some concrete materials to them, we have some simple buildings that definitely wouldn't cut it for close-ups, but for distant buildings covered in fog, it works fine. To add a little bit more variation and sense of scale to the background, I made these huge power lines using the wireframe modifier and curves for the wires. After adding in a bit of grass and some thick fog to the scene, it started to look pretty decent. I wasn't too worried about the background since I knew I wanted to have that nice anamorphic depth of field look, so most of it would be blurred out anyways. I simplified the geometry of the characters a bit and then exported them to Mixamo to take care of the rigging automatically for me. And then I got entirely sidetracked and started working on the blood effects. I used Blender's built-in fluid simulation to create these splashes, and to get the mesh, I instanced metaballs on the fluid particles. This gave me better real-time control over the look of the simulation. For example, if I wanted the droplets to be smaller, I could just scale the particles down in the particle tab. To simplify the final scene, I exported the simulation as an Alembic file, and this way I could just import it straight into the scene without having to worry about caching the simulation and stuff. I felt like the environment was looking a little bit boring, so I made these craters from like explosions or something, and I used a weight group to distribute the grass a little bit more randomly. To make a really simple but effective rain effect, I used a simple plane with a particle system and then set it to render as this low poly raindrop. It looks funny in the viewport, but when it's rendered with motion blur, it's quite convincing. At this point, it was time to start animating. So I put on my Rococo suit and recorded some motion capture. Usually you'd want to clean up the motion capture data afterwards, but since I was working on a really tight deadline, I used the raw data as is. The only thing I really did was to adjust some of the rotation of the limbs using the NLA editor in Blender. This allows you to kind of layer the animation so you can keep the original but blend it with some rotation changes, for example. To get the hands to line up correctly on the rifle, I parented the rifle to the bone of the hand holding it, then added in an empty and used an inverse kinematic constraint on the other hand using the empty as a goal. This way I could control where on the weapon they should grab, and it worked pretty seamlessly. Then it was just a matter of combining these animations into a sort of stage play and animate the camera after the fact. To keep everything organized, I duplicated the blend file, so I would have one separate file for each sort of scene. After all of the scenes I needed were rendered into image sequences, I imported those into HitFilm and did all of my color grading there. I gave it this cold bluish hue and gave it some vignette, and gave it some vignette and lens distortion to sell the anamorphic effect. Then it was just a matter of piecing everything together in the editing timeline to achieve a nice little edit of the short film. After adding some simple sound effects, this was the final result. For having made this in under a week, I'm pretty happy with the overall result. I think it was a really nice proof of concept, and I'm kind of excited to start a bigger project similar to this in the future. Anyways, thanks for watching, and if you decide to create a short film of your own, no matter how long you've been using Blender for, I'd love for you to post a link in the comment section so we can watch it. Consider subscribing to support the channel, and have a great New Year's Eve.